Once upon a time, in a room filled with sparkling light, a glance, a touch, a moment of pure magic. In a world of fleeting trends and passing glances, Hales Jewelers offers something timeless. From delicate details to bold statements, our collections of fashion jewelry is curated to inspire and enchant, to make you the center of your own story. That's the magic of Hales Jewelers.
Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, here again for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time on the controversial life and inks of Vinnie Colletta. Last episode, we focused on one of the most famous and arguably greatest inkers, Joe Sinnott. This time, we'll be focusing on one of the comics' most infamous and controversial inkers, Vinnie Colletta. To some, like Eddie Campbell, the artist from Hell, he defended Vinnie Colletta's inks, claiming they just didn't reprint well. And on May of 2007, he actually posted this on the internet, stating that he was one of his favorite inkers in the 1960s. Campbell stated that inkers like Joe Sinnott and Frank Giacomo knew how to make their inks indestructible, thus they were more popular today. To others, though, and to many that responded to Campbell's internet post, he ruined the classic pencils of artists like Jack Kirby, who he worked with at Marvel and DC and was the first to ink such characters, such as the Hercules, Darkseid, and Mr. Miracle, and settings like New Genesis and Apocalypse. Some called him the gold standard of bad inking, as Eric Larson, the creator of Savage Dragon, pointed out, though he believes they were overstating it a bit. Others were in the middle, such as Mark Evanier, Jack Kirby's longtime assistant and featured biographer, who called Colletta a product of the times, forced to produce art on a monthly basis to keep up with demand. During his career, Colletta had 3,580 listings as an artist and inker from the 1950s and 1980s, working everywhere and with nearly everyone, with 50 titles at Charlton, 90 at DC, and over 100 at Marvel. Colletta inked everything from war to romance to superheroes, some genres which were strangely combined, as he inked the weddings of both Reed Richards and Sue Storm and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and Mary Jane Watson. He was known for his fast work and fine lines, which included a rough, scratchy look. He was especially great at the female form and their eyelashes, which resulted from his softer inking style. However, he had horrible at structures and technology, forcing his removal from Fantastic Four and Jack Kirby's Fourth World. Through his life and career, Vinnie Colletta made good inks and bad, and for better or for worse, his own mark on the Silver Age of comic books. Vinnie Colletta was born Vincent Colletta in Casteldassi in Italy on October 15, 1923, a small town of 9,000 in the province of Palermo, Sicily. His parents were Rosa and Franklin Colletta, who was part of the local mafia. Vincent was raised to be afraid of the law, and the family left for Brooklyn, his father first, followed by Vinnie and his mother 10 years later. In New York, Vinnie's mother had his father leave the mob life, where they eventually moved to New Jersey and opened an Italian market. It was here that Colletta's connection to the mafia truly ended, according to Coletta's own son, Franklin. Growing up, Colletta loved the art of Lou Fine and Jack Kirby, along with comic strips like Hal Foster's Prince Valiant. He would later serve in the World War II in the Pacific Theater, where he painted on the U.S. Air Force bombers' hoses. After completing his service, Colletta attended art school and sold paintings and landscapes for money in New Jersey. By the 1950s, Vinnie Colletta was in his 30s and married to his wife Viola, with whom he would have one son, Franklin. He started working in comics in 1952 with the romance comic genre, which was just starting to boom, having begun just a few years earlier when Jack Kirby and Joe Simon practically invented it with Young Romance #1 in 1947. Colletta would pencil and ink works like Intimate Love for Better Publications, Daring Love for Youthful Magazine, and Dungaree Doll in First Love Illustrated #89 from Harvey. The latter was about a girl who runs her ailing dad's gas station, thus boys see her as a mechanic over being a cute girl. Colletta would later work with Joe Sinnott at Marvel, at the time called Atlas, and Charlton out of his art studio in New Jersey, producing 2,700 pages together. Sinnott would state Colletta frequently cut corners, but continued to work with him as he owned the Charlton contract, which included comics like Love Diary and Teen Confessions. Colletta also worked with Hy Eisman on 1,500 pages at $10 a page, and he said Colletta was more of a pragmatic about his art, seeing it as a way to make money. Eisman also stated that it was around this time that Colletta committed to inking over penciling, as he could do that a lot faster, which Eisman thought was a shame, as he thought he was a truly talented penciler. It is unknown exactly which comic was the first he inked, but the most popular suggestions are Atlas's Western Tales number 10 on April of 1956, feature Annie Oakley, in which he co-inked with Saul Brodsky on Brodsky's pencils, or in My Own Romance number 65 on September 1958, which with the feature I Met My Love Again, where Colletta inked over Matt Baker's pencils. Eisman did credit Colletta with teaching him how to work faster, like ignoring picture framing or using a picture of an eye with a single tear to show crying, as opposed to showing the whole face. With this, they were able to produce 7 to 10 pages a day. In retrospect, many consider Coletta's run of romance comics his best work, being able to draw beautiful women better than anyone else, despite the CCA's restrictions that hampered this in the late 1950s, i.e. no cleavage or sex. Since Charlton also produced magazines like True Magazine, Colletta put his photography skills to work as well, and Eisman even recalls posing as a body for a staged crime scene picture. Vinnie Colletta came across as a classic Italian in appearance, where he wore a white suit with a black shirt unbuttoned at the navel, along with a gold medallion. When Joe Sinnott attended a comic book convention in 1975 organized by Colletta, he had never met him in person or seen a picture of him, but he was able to pick him out of a crowd of 1,000 in an instant. Many called him the Italian uncle that everyone has in their family. He loved good food and was a bit of a ladies' man, including hanging out with models like Louise Childs, a model and actress from the movie Moonraker, or Shelley Winters. Reportedly, Colletta also worked as a photographer, which got him to know many of these actors and models, which also included Peter Falk and James Ferrantino. Colletta claimed to have mob connections, despite his father leaving the mob when he was a child, and looked like a gangster, to a point that Stan Lee had him retake a promotional picture because he looked too much like a mob hitman. Some believed it based on his house at 3 Old Woods Road in Saddle River, New Jersey, which he bought in 1962 and was priced at $3,589,000, complete with a full-size swimming pool, cabana house, and clay tennis court on 4 acres of one of the richest neighborhoods in New Jersey. When guests like Joe Kubert or Roy Thomas came over, he refused to allow pictures to be taken there, furthering the myth. However, this house came about because Colletta got himself deeply into debt, thus he had to work extremely hard to pay it off, pulling off numerous one-nighters over 25 years he and his family lived there. At one point, Colletta thought about starting a restaurant in a prime location as well, though Stan Lee talked him out of it. Ironically, a restaurant would open there and became successful, and Lee and Colletta kidded themselves years afterwards about it. To maintain his work volume, Vinnie Colletta would hire numerous assistants and traded volume for quality. The first complaint was that he didn't ink parts he didn't want to and used assistants to do the background work. As a result, the panels would have varying quality as each was done by a different assistant, but he also got paid some of the lowest rates for inkings at the time, which got him a great number of jobs. Also requiring him thus to work these great number of jobs just to make money and make ends meet. Among the artists who hated his work was Neil Adams, who re-inked his own pencils on Brave and the Bold number 81 after Colletta got a hold of them, and Alex Toff, though Jack Kirby did tolerate him. Gil Kane jokingly stated Colletta was his second favorite inker, and when asked who was his first, Kane said, anyone else. The biggest problem, and he stated, was that Colletta was Rush's work even when he didn't have to, and more than a few stated he would have been a much better inker if he just slowed down a bit. During this time, Colletta also worked for DC on books like Falling in Love and Girls' Love Stories, along with other genres such as adventure like Jungle Action, Horror Fantasy, and Uncanny Tales. Vinnie Coletta's inks in these stories would overpower the pencils he worked on, and he would frequently make every character look Middle American. On the side, he was also talented at picking racehorses and even was called the artist at the tracks. However, Colletta never told anyone his secret, even when Eisman asked him, stating, no, it will lower my odds. It was said that the $40 he won from those races was when he was the happiest. Vinnie Coletta's studio was open day and night due to his work schedule, and even allowed cops to come in to make phone calls. His friend, model actress Lotta St. Edmund, also said everywhere Colletta went, it was like a club, with lots of friends and hangers-on. His romance style was light, warm, and lush, according to Trina Robbins, especially with his work on Marvel Romance comics, as opposed to DC's, which according to Robbins was cold and angular. Even Alex tossed Malik Coletta's work on romance comics, which according to John Romita Sr. was really saying something. As mentioned before, Toff hated his inks. However, many argue this may have been what hurt Colletta when the romance faded and the superhero genre emerged, as their stories were more detailed and took more time. That was exactly where Colletta was heading, though, as he would soon start a career in one of the most acclaimed comic books at the time. Colletta made a big name for himself when he inked Jack Kirby's pencils on the Tales of Asgard feature on July of 1964 for Journey into Mystery number 106, which later became The Mighty Thor. He had previously inked Jack Kirby's pencils in Kid Outlaw number 100 in September of 1961 and his cover for Love Romances number 98 on March of 1962. By May of 1965, Colletta was doing the whole book with issue number 116 and would continue through 1970 for a 6-year run, which included Jack Kirby's last pencils on the book, issue number 179 on August of 1970. Working with Kirby, he and Colletta developed a style that became a trademark for the character, along with helping to expand his roster. Hercules was introduced in Journey into Mystery Annual 1965, which Colletta inked. However, he became infamous for removing details from Kirby's original pencils so he could ink faster, including whole characters and backgrounds. For example, in The Mighty Thor number 125, Jack Kirby's original pencils, of which Eric Larson owns, a scene depicts Hercules throwing a tree off of some train tracks before a train passes by. However, after Colletta finished the inks, the train is completely erased. The scratchy look of his inks did make Thor more natural, though, as you can notice chinks in the armor are cuts on his skin. The reason for Colletta cutting corners was that he argued he worked on so many books at once, but Joe Sinnott countered that he was the only inker he knew that did that. When it came to female characters, as his romance background did pay off here, in The Mighty Thor, though, like Sif, Colletta was fantastic, with some noting that she truly had the eyelashes of a goddess. Plus, one could argue that the art or the story was not truly affected by the changes, but die-hard Kirby fans considered it blasphemy, especially in The Mighty Thor, which many considered the high mark of Kirby's art career. Plus, more than a few credit Colletta with helping his art on these pages, including Eric Larson. A battle scene in The Mighty Thor number 127, Larson points out as one of Coletta's many highlights. In fact, Alan Cooperberg, who penciled the Thor from 1982 to 83, begged for Vinnie Colletta to be his inker, only getting him on the last issue of his run. And according to Cooperberg, that was the one issue he penciled where Thor actually looked like Thor. Even Stan Lee got frustrated when Thor number 139 came out in 1967, noticing many of the characters were now smoky half silhouettes, another corner-cutting technique that Colletta used, but remained friends with him as they socialized a number of times, and Colletta greatly admired Lee. Stan Lee as a friend helped, as fans were frequently attacking his inks, though some admired him as well. This didn't stop Vinnie Colletta from inking many other Marvel books, since the first Daredevil comics and Fantastic Four number 40 to 43 for Jack Kirby, along with Fantastic Four Annual number 3, which featured the wedding of Reed Richards and Sue Storm, along with a guest starring nearly every Marvel character at the time. However, even Stan Lee couldn't tolerate this kind of according to the Marvel flagship book and had him removed. Simply put, Colletta was awful at technology in the Fantastic Four, though he was great with texture like in Mighty Thor, thus he was better suited for the series. Eddie Campbell went so far as to compare his work on Thor to Lord of the Rings. His replacement was Joe Sinnott, who previously inked the Fantastic Four number 5 that featured the first appearance of Dr. Doom. It would be an epic run with Jack Kirby that still stands as the high water mark of the series today, and of course, Sinnott is considered one of the greatest inkers of all time. As for Colletta, he remained the go-to inker for editors to get jobs done quickly, especially on books running late. But the low quality and corner cutting he brought to his inks hurt him in the long run, as more than a few pencilers started to object to working with him. His son Franklin said his first passion was actually painting, and while he did shortcuts, he never tried to compromise the art. For Colletta, comics was just more about making money. When Jack Kirby went to DC in 1970, Colletta would follow him there, beating out Wally Wood and Frank Giaccaro for the job of inking Kirby's Fourth World books, mainly due to being fast and cheap. Especially Kirby was getting top page rate at the time, thus DC needed a way to save a few bucks. Starting out, Kirby didn't care as long as his inker made the deadlines, something no one argues Colletta could do, and was more concerned with who the colorist was. However, Coletta's inks on Kirby's DC books, which started with Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, was not at even his best, even for his admirers. He followed up on New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, and it was at this point that Kirby truly started to hate Coletta's inks, and it truly backfired when pages of the Fourth World were leaked to Marvel. According to Colletta, who was still working for Marvel and DC, he was just showing off his work, but for Kirby, who was paranoid about Marvel spying on him after his departure, it was tantamount to sabotage. When Kirby confronted Colletta over this and his shortcuts in inking, Colletta said that Kirby should just simply make his art simpler. Thus, Kirby, with encouragement from Mark Evner and Wally Wood, demanded Colletta be replaced with Mike Royer on New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. Miracle after their 5th issues, though he would stay on with Jimmy Olsen. This was all under Carmen Infantino, who was publisher of DC at the time, and who Colletta openly hated, calling him a Goomba, an Italian slur for cousin, not the mushroom villains from Super Mario Brothers, though that's still kind of insulting as well. For Infantino, it was the first time he ever remembered any one of the DC artists going against Colletta. Despite the change, this wouldn't be enough to save Jack Kirby's 4th World books, which would all be canceled by the next year. Still working at Marvel during all this, Colletta was starting to ink the Tomb of Dracula series in 1972, before the writer Marv Wolfman had him taken off the book while Jerry Conway had him removed from Thor. This so incensed Colletta, he threatened then editor-in-chief Roy Thomas, stating to him, "I feel like you got a hand in my pocket, and I'm thinking about throwing you out the window." Thomas assured Colletta that while he was being taken off Thor, he would be giving another book, so he wouldn't actually be losing any income, which is all Colletta really cared about. Thus, they didn't have any harsh words afterwards. Previously, Roy met an adult film actress, Daryl Lloyd Rains, at Coletta's studio and even took a picture with her. However, he quickly told his wife about the incident in case Colletta ever tried to use it against him. Of note, Thomas never saw those photos or heard about them ever again after that. Colletta was even given a job inking the first 7 issues of the Invaders comic, a series Roy Thomas helped create back in the Avengers number 71 in December of 1969, about a group of superheroes Captain America fought with during World War II, but soon he was back at DC in a much bigger role. Carmen Infantino had been fired as publisher, much to Coletta's glee, and the new publisher, Jeanette Kahn, made him art director in May of 1976, reportedly because he was one of the few artists she actually knew. He would stay in the job for 3 years before leaving on May of 1979, with his most significant claim being that he discovered Frank Miller, while continuing to ink numerous DC books, notably Wonder Woman, who naturally fitted Coletta's style. However, he once again would be criticized by many of the pencilers, notably Mike Grail, who hated his inks on Warlord, a book he launched in 1975 about an Air Force pilot who finds himself stranded in a secret inner Earth. Colletta started inking on the book in 1978, and Grail was originally excited, as Colletta was at this point considered an industry legend. However, when the finished pages for Warlord came back bearing little resemblance to his original pencils, according to Mike Grail, his opinion soon soured. Even the fans noticed, asking why Grail's art fell off after issue number 15, resulting in Grail wanting Colletta removed. The DC brass informed Grail that they would do it if he got 2 months ahead in the book, which Grail did, along with 4 covers, but they refused to do it anyway. Thus, Grail held back on the issue so he could ink it himself. Reportedly, it got so bad in Warlord number 44 in 1981, a gambler resembling Vinnie Colletta had his hand chopped off trying to cheat Warlord. Years later, though, Grail would admit he had a hard time working with inkers in general, preferring to do it himself, and the Colletta was good when he needed to be. Plus, when you needed someone to meet a deadline, Colletta was still your man. Colletta would eventually step down as art director, though according to many, he was just a full-time inker and did little work outside of that. Joe Stanton gave an example when he and DC editor Paul Livitz was coming up with the look of the Huntress, who was originally the Earth 2 daughter of Batman and Catwoman, and Colletta during this meeting spent the whole time asleep on the couch. Colletta continued to ink numerous DC books after stepping down as art director because editors always needed those deadlines to fill. In the 1980s, Vinnie Colletta worked mostly freelance, though he bonded with Marvel's new editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, and even used his photography skills to shoot most of the photos in the Marvel Fumamito book of 1984, which depicted the Marvel bullpen as a live-action comic book. Colletta had mixed feelings about from the Marvel artists, though, and many never said it to his face. Colletta would eventually criticize Marvel over Shooter's firing in a profane letter in 1987, and as a result, he went from making 26 Marvel books in 1987 to just 6 in 1988. Reportedly, he even called Roy Thomas about taking the editor-in-chief position before it was given to Tom DeFalco. One of Coletta's last inking jobs at Marvel was Fred Hembeck's Destroys the Universe in 1989. Hembeck originally asked for Terry Austin, but when he was unavailable, editor Larry Hama suggested Colletta, resulting in Hembeck to beg for anyone else, such as Chip Stone. In the end, Colletta got the job, and when Hembeck got the finished pages back, he couldn't help but notice that many details changed and still doesn't look fondly on the comic book as a result. In a strange move, especially for the constantly in-depth Colletta, he sold off his stacks of original art at $5 a page while also starting to work on a movie screenplay. He would end up selling his house in Saddle River for a ton of money, according to his son, giving him the financial cushion needed to try his hand at screenwriting. Colletta ended up writing 4 screenplays, such as Primo, a mafia comedy, and had previously claimed that he auditioned for the role of Sonny in The Godfather to Joe Kubert, who stated that he might have been kidding, but he did look the part. Vinnie Colletta would die of cancer on June 3rd of 1991 in Westwood, New Jersey at the age of 67. It was claimed his funeral was secret due to mob connections, though of course that is once again furthering the myth. He rarely gave interviews for the press, especially to fans, and is still controversial to this day, though he would receive Special Recognition Award posthumously from the Inkwells in 2016, which his son Franklin extended his thanks. Some still call him a hack, while others a true legend and professional. However, like many controversies in the world, and comic books in particular, it was likely somewhere in the middle. Vinnie Colletta had talent, as many know, with his ability to draw women in texture, but shortchanged himself by rushing through books. But even this was Coletta's strength, as when an editor needed a book to make its deadline, Colletta was there, and in the rush to meet that monthly schedule, he could do a 10-day job in just 3. Many of them, from Thor to the New Gods, being the most important comic books at the time. In the end, Frick Hembeck probably described Vinnie Colletta best. His work was unmistakable, and he was unforgettable, but that is not always a good thing. I would like to thank the chief source for this episode, The Thin Black Line, Perspectives on Vinnie Colletta, Comics' Most Controversial Inker by Robert L. Brandt, Jr., a great biography of Vinnie Colletta with numerous interviews of the many comic book greats that worked with him, along with great reprints of his inks and the original pencils he's changed. So you can see and judge for yourself if Colletta inks were good or bad. A must-read for any comic book history fan. And now it is April 2nd, 2026, time for the favorite comic of the week. Batman, number 8, by Matt Fraction and Ryan Zook, which is a very good, kind of a catch-up issue that finds Batman reaching out to Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, on how to take down the Vandal Savage, who, by the way, is now the commissioner of Gotham City, and is teaming up with the new mayor, Poison Ivy. This is a really fun issue that really is mostly about just a bunch of talking. It does a great job, catching up where everyone stands in this new status quo, and it's very interesting to see Vandal Savage teaming up with Poison Ivy to take on the Bat family. And also, it's neat that Alan Scott kind of explains to Batman that why is Vandal Savage, who's usually a Justice League level threat, is just concentrating on Gotham City for some reason, pretty much theorizing it must be something personal, and Batman needs to get to the bottom of it. Just a great catch-up issue. Fraction, like I said, Fraction is the great job is writing his characters in dialogue. And Zook, while he's not as dynamic of an artist as Jorge Jimenez, whose part was busy, likely because he did a fantastic Superman Spider-Man issue last week. He does a great job with these more talky, dialogue-heavy issues. Great read from the beginning, and ends on a nice little cliffhanger that really sets up the next status quo for the Bat family. And all in all, just another great read from DC, another sign that the DC streak's continuing right now. They are hitting on all cylinders. Though I will admit there was a certain Marvel book, Venom, that I was wanting to pick up this week because something long overdue finally happened. But it was sold out at my local comic book store. And if you know what it is, well, you know why it's sold out, because it's about bloody time. But till then, definitely check out Batman. The current run has been fantastic. And that concludes this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for it's likely another episode of The Archives. Until then, go ahead and enjoy some good comic book. And of course, check out Batman. It's been a great run lately.